583 people all perished. The deadliest plane crash in aviation history. Detailed report and cause. Aviation is the safest mode of transport due to its stringent safety regulations, advanced technology, and continuous pilot and crew training. Air traffic control systems, rigorous maintenance checks, and thorough safety protocols minimize risks, resulting in fewer accidents compared to other modes of travel, making flying highly reliable and secure. Despite this, plane crashes still happen, resulting in significant loss. An aviation crash is a tragic event leading to loss of lives and properties. This can occur at any stage of flight, during taxi and takeoff, during landing, and even at cruise altitude. Crashes can result from factors like human error, technical malfunctions, poor weather, or miscommunication. Aviation accidents are often tragic, but few incidents have resonated with the global public and aviation industry as deeply as the Tenerife airport disaster. This event, which occurred on March 27, 1977, stands as the deadliest plane crash in aviation history, claiming the lives of 583 people. The crash involved two Boeing 747 jumbo jets, one operated by KLM and the other operated by Pan American World Airways, or Pan Am, which collided on the runway of a small airport on the Canary island of Tenerife. The disaster remains significant not only for its scale, but for the lessons it taught about communication, human error, and the need for robust safety protocols in aviation. Before we dive into the details, if you are still new to aviation info, please do not forget to subscribe to my channel. First, let's dive into the overview of the disaster. The Tenerife disaster was a confluence of unfortunate events, compounded by human error and environmental factors. The two aircraft involved in the collision were KLM Flight 4805, en route from Amsterdam to Gran Canaria, and Pan Am Flight 1736, which was flying from Los Angeles to the same destination. Both planes were redirected to Tenerife North Airport, formerly Los Rodeos Airport, due to a terrorist bomb explosion at Gran Canaria Airport, forcing temporary closures. Tenerife North Airport, a much smaller facility than Gran Canaria, was ill-prepared for the sudden influx of large international flights. Also, under such extreme weather conditions with poor visibility, Tenerife North had only one runway and one taxiway, which meant that planes had to taxi along the runway to position themselves for takeoff. This unusual arrangement set the stage for the collision. Adding to the complexity was heavy fog that significantly reduced visibility, making visual navigation nearly impossible. The dense fog prevented the air traffic controllers and the flight crews from seeing the entire runway at a glance. Timeline of events. We will analyze the events that happened before this crash occurred, one event leading to the other. Diversion to Tenerife. The chain of events leading to the disaster began with a terrorist bombing at Gran Canaria Airport, which closed the facility and forced incoming planes to land at Tenerife North, an airport not designed to handle multiple jumbo jets simultaneously. Several planes, including KLM Flight 4805 and Pan Am Flight 1736, were diverted to the small airport. Congestion at Tenerife North. With planes arriving unexpectedly, Tenerife North Airport quickly became congested. The airport's limited infrastructure and lack of adequate parking space for large aircraft forced arriving planes to wait on the taxiways. Both the KLM and Pan Am aircraft were parked on the apron, awaiting clearance to depart for Gran Canaria once the main airport reopened.
The KLM crew, under the command of Captain Jacob Veldhuizen van Zanten, was under significant time pressure. The flight had already been delayed due to the diversion, and Van Zanten was concerned that the crew would exceed their regulated flying hours, which could lead to further delays or even a requirement to cancel the flight. This urgency contributed to a sense of haste that would prove catastrophic.
Fog and poor visibility. As the planes prepared for departure, dense fog rolled in, drastically reducing visibility on the runway. The control tower, situated at one end of the runway, could not see the entire length of it, and the pilots in the cockpits of both the KLM and Pan Am planes had limited or no visibility of each other due to the fog.
With only one runway at Tenerife North, both planes had to taxi along the runway before taking off. Pan Am Flight 1736 was instructed to taxi down the runway and then exit onto a taxiway, allowing the KLM aircraft, which was positioned ahead, to take off. However, due to the poor visibility, the Pan Am crew missed the designated taxiway, meaning their plane was still on the runway when KLM Flight 4805 was preparing for takeoff.
Miscommunication. A critical element in the crash was the breakdown in communication between the air traffic controllers and the pilots of the two aircraft. Multiple misunderstandings and misinterpretations occurred over the radio. The KLM captain misunderstood the clearance from the tower, thinking they had been given permission to take off, when in fact they had only received clearance to taxi. Meanwhile, the Pan Am plane was still on the runway. The collision, at 5:06 p.m., the KLM aircraft, believing it had takeoff clearance, began accelerating down the runway. At the same time, the Pan Am crew, realizing that the KLM plane was approaching, tried to get out of the way by turning off the runway, but it was too late. The nose gear of the KLM plane lifted off, but its belly and engine struck the Pan Am aircraft, tearing through the fuselage of the American jumbo jet. The KLM plane briefly became airborne, but immediately crashed back onto the runway, bursting into flames. Immediate aftermath. Both planes were engulfed in fire following the collision. All 248 passengers and crew aboard the KLM flight were killed instantly. On the Pan Am flight, 335 people perished, but remarkably, 61 passengers and crew members managed to escape the burning wreckage. The survivors of the Pan Am flight, including flight attendants who heroically helped passengers evacuate, were able to exit the plane before the fire spread. Here is the detail of the causes of the crash. The Tenerife disaster is often cited as a classic example of how human error, combined with environmental factors, can lead to catastrophic outcomes. Several key issues contributed to the crash.
The KLM captain, Jacob van Zanten, a highly experienced pilot, made the fatal mistake of attempting to take off without receiving explicit clearance from the tower. His misinterpretation of the instructions, combined with the pressure to adhere to flying hours regulations, was a critical factor in the collision.
There was a fundamental breakdown in communication between the KLM flight crew, the Pan Am crew, and the air traffic controllers. In aviation, clear and unambiguous communication is vital. However, in this case, vague language, overlapping radio transmissions, and non-standard phrasing created confusion. For example, the KLM crew reported they were at takeoff, which was ambiguous and did not clearly indicate whether they were ready to take off or already in the process.
The dense fog that enveloped the airport played a major role in the accident. The poor visibility meant that neither the KLM crew nor the Pan Am crew could see the other aircraft, and the control tower could not see the full length of the runway or the position of both aircrafts. This made visual verification impossible and increased reliance on radio communications, which were flawed.
Tenerife North Airport was not equipped with ground radar, which could have allowed the air traffic controllers to monitor the positions of the aircraft on the runway. Had ground radar been available, the controllers might have been able to prevent the accident by realizing that the Pan Am plane was still on the runway as the KLM flight began its takeoff roll.
The layout of Tenerife North, with only one runway and a parallel taxiway, contributed to the confusion and congestion. The necessity for aircraft to taxi on the active runway, combined with the sudden influx of large planes due to the diversion from Gran Canaria, created a high-risk situation. Lessons learned and lasting impact. The Tenerife disaster had a profound impact on the aviation industry, prompting numerous changes in safety protocols, communication procedures, and training for both pilots and air traffic controllers. Some of the key lessons and reforms that emerged from the tragedy include:
one of the most significant changes after the Tenerife crash was the overhaul of aviation communication protocols. The International Civil Aviation Organization introduced stricter guidelines for the language used in radio transmissions. Phrases like takeoff are now only used to clear a plane for actual takeoff, and all other stages of flight preparation must use alternative terms to avoid ambiguity. This standardization ensures that communications are clear and less prone to misinterpretation.
The Tenerife disaster highlighted the importance of effective teamwork and communication within the cockpit. In response, the aviation industry developed crew resource management training, which emphasizes collaboration among all members of the flight crew. CRM teaches pilots to speak up if they notice a potential issue, even if it means questioning a senior officer like the captain. This change has been instrumental in reducing human errors and improving safety.
Following the disaster, many airports around the world implemented ground radar systems to monitor the movements of aircraft on the ground. These systems allow air traffic controllers to track planes even in poor visibility, significantly reducing the risk of runway incursions like the one that occurred at Tenerife.
In the wake of the Tenerife crash, airports and aviation authorities focused on improving runway safety. Airports with limited infrastructure, like Tenerife North at the time, were upgraded to prevent similar incidents. Procedures for runway use and taxiing have also become more rigorous to avoid runway incursions.
Training programs for pilots now place a greater emphasis on avoiding complacency, especially in situations where external pressures, like time constraints or fatigue, might affect decision-making. The Tenerife disaster underscored the dangers of rushing critical processes such as takeoff, and modern training encourages pilots to always prioritize safety over schedules.
To round this off, the Tenerife airport disaster of 1977 remains the deadliest plane crash in aviation history, with 583 lives lost. The crash was the result of a series of tragic circumstances, including pilot error, miscommunication, and environmental factors like fog. However, the disaster also led to significant reforms that have greatly improved aviation safety. The introduction of standardized communication protocols, crew resource management, ground radar systems, and enhanced runway safety procedures were all direct outcomes of this event. While the loss of life was staggering, the lessons learned from this crash have gone a long way to improve aviation safety and to prevent other crashes from the lessons learned. Thank you for watching. This has been Aviation Info, your #1 African YouTube channel, always bring to you the best of aviation content. Don't forget to be a part of Outgrowing Community by subscribing.